Your weekly horoscope with Jerry and Matt.
Audio Jungle. Audio Jungle.
She just likes me for my body.
Hey, welcome, horror fans. Welcome to another edition of the Weekly Horoscope. I'm your host, Jerry, here with my partner, Matt. And Matt, this week we have an interesting topic we want to hit on, and the topic is body horror. And I find this very unique. Of course, this kind of identifies the work of David Cronenberg, so I do find it a little strange that we're covering this topic without talking about any of his films. But, you know, to me, body horror is kind of like loss of identity, a loss of oneself, and it also can represent like difference from the biological norm. And these things can get very creepy, very goopy, very disturbing, and they can go a lot of different directions. What's your thoughts on this category?
Yeah, I agree. You know, the body horror subgenre, to me, kind of focuses on transformation of the human body, or like a deconstruction of the human body, which also often leads to like special effects taking it to the cinematic limits as far as like what the practical effects can do. So that often takes, like, you can take basic scripts or plots and sometimes create like masterpieces or cult classic films like Reanimator or Hellraiser.
Yeah, I think maybe probably the most recognizable example of body horror is David Cronenberg's The Fly, a movie we've previously covered. So obviously we're not going to cover it again, but yeah, you can do some really creepy, goopy things, and it was a perfect time with the special effects heavy era of the 80s. You saw a lot of body horror in the 80s, but I do think there's been a resurgence in the last few years with Brandon Cronenberg and David Cronenberg's got some new works in line. I've kind of a comeback to body horror.
Yeah, when I was growing up, I always associated horror movies with like the body horror genre, right? Like a lot of the 80s movies. When I was like, a young teen, I would watch these movies like Reanimator and stuff, and to me that was horror, right? Like when movies took all of these special effects and kind of just took it to the limit. I kind of always associated that to be like the pinnacle of what horror movies were. The other stuff didn't really scare me as much. And kind of looking back at it, like I think I just have even more appreciation for what they were doing on set and what they were doing with the film.
Yeah, great point. I also find it interesting is a couple weeks ago we covered our top 20 horror directors of all time, and two of our entries are both represented here this week. So that's going to be fun, and we know we're dealing with quality work.
Absolutely.
Our first film in the body horror category is From Beyond from 1986, directed by Stuart Gordon. This was his immediate follow-up to Reanimator and is another H.P. Lovecraft-based story. And this I saw, it was my era, like, right? That's right when I was heavy into these movies, and right out of the gate, I loved it the first time I saw it.
Yeah, I think it's one of the best body horror movies of the 80s. I think the special effects still hold up to this day. And, I really love the concept of like the multi-dimensional monsters and creatures existing in like a parallel plane of our existence, but they don't use it in like a religious or mystical means like possession or ghosts. It's kind of done through like technology and what man can like achieve like technologically. So like the dangers of that. So I think it's a more interesting, or not more interesting, but an interesting way to like kind of tell that tale.
Yeah, and we've talked about in the past how difficult it can be to bring Lovecraft's, unknowable, unseeable, unimaginable visions to the screen without it coming across as hokey. And even though, some of the digital effects in this movie obviously are dated now at this point, I think they pull this off without it being ridiculous.
I agree.
Our movie starts with lab assistant Crawford powers on something called the resonator, and immediately his head hurts and he sees creatures floating through the air, and they kind of look like fish with nasty teeth, but they're swimming through the air all
like
around.
Eels.
Yeah. And he gets bit in the face by one of these floaters and shuts the machine off. And he runs to tell Dr. Pretorius, love the name.
Right, which is that's a homage to Frankenstein, right? Frankenstein's teacher.
Yeah. Like, of course, that's cool. And he tells him that it worked. and the doctor is very excited, and he runs up to the room, but he's, Crawford's trying to warn him, like, wait, there's things you need to know about this. He doesn't care. The doctor's excited and turns it on high. And, we kind of cut the scene with winds blowing, and like this mystical world is opened up and something is coming. And I thought, one thing I noticed by watching this movie, it's from 1986. There's a lot of parts of this movie that really influential to Hellraiser.
I was thinking the same exact thing. I actually put that in my notes, and it kind of, Pretorius, Crawford later says that the five senses weren't enough for him. Like he had to experience more. Yeah, and he was kind of obsessed. He had to unlock this world to experience like more than his senses could handle. Right. So and then accessing another dimension where these things come in, and it's kind of just like nothing but pain. Like I saw the parallel to that exactly.
And it never clicked in my head before, having seen these movies back in the 80s.
Right.
But the S&M, the bondage,
Yes, yeah.
pushing all those envelopes to experience more than most people experience. There's a direct parallel there, and it really jumped out.
Yeah, me too. I was thinking the same thing. So it made me wonder, reading Lovecraft, how much of an influence that was on a Hellraiser. When you watch this, it's almost kind of obvious. Like even like you said, they're all talking about how they all felt like when they turned it on, they felt sexual, and there was something else going on. They couldn't explain it.
Yeah. Yeah, and it goes back to, I actually read a foreword of a book on Lovecraft this weekend that talked about his influence and the layers and layers and layers that aren't even readily recognizable of how they influence fiction and all different kinds of horror 100 years later. I think it fits exactly what we're talking about here.
Yeah, and it almost makes you want to see like more adaptations of his stories like nowadays. Turn it into more films. But like you said, it's difficult to do with the way his writing was.
Yeah. So a neighbor is complaining about all the noise and the crackling and the lightning going off in the upstairs of this house, and her dog takes off and runs over into the house. I find it interesting that this was the middle of the night. Crawford had to go get Pretorius out of his bedroom to show him what he showed, but the front door of the house was open.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like the dog just runs in, the lady just runs in. Like, okay, that's how you go to sleep at night? Sure.
Yeah. It was a nice neighborhood.
She's at the door, and we see the light behind the door, and then we see an axe come through the door, very Jack Nicholson shining axe. And then Crawford runs out with the door, with the axe, runs by the lady. They're both screaming. He runs down the stairs, and she'd called the cops because of the noise and because of everything going on. He's running down with an axe, and the cops are there waiting to arrest him.
Yep.
Now we jump to the cops. They go upstairs, and Pretorius is dead and headless. But it's not like an axe murder headless. There's no blood and there's no head.
Yeah. It's just kind of like, it's kind of like goopy, right? Like there's kind of like this like spine thing sticking up, and he's kind of like it's weird looking.
Yeah, but it's just gone. You wouldn't look at that and say, oh, the guy with the axe removed the head. It didn't. Yeah. It wasn't that at all.
There's no blood splatter. There was no head in a bag somewhere. Yeah, it was just gone. Yeah.
We're now at the hospital where Crawford is committed. He's locked up, and the cops bring in Dr. Catherine McMichaels to evaluate his ability to stand trial for murder. And she immediately has a conflict with a Dr. Block, who's in charge of the facility, who's read her work. And it's, the typical, they disagree on their methods, like you just want to medicate him and lock him up. And she's like, well, you just want to turn them into lab rats for your own benefit.
Yeah. You're just obsessed with the science. And she's like, well, yeah, I'm a scientist. So
yeah, these kind of debates in the psychology field have gone on since there's been a psychology field, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. But they decide, she interviews Crawford, and he tells her about the creatures and the dimension that's all around them, and that they're there now, but you can't see them. And it's all about the pineal gland.
Which is kind of going. Yeah, and well, it's kind of go back to Descartes because Descartes said that it was kind of like a intermediary, like it was a gland that we use to like meditate to another part of like existence. So he kind of took what Descartes said and kind of ran with the story.
And there's been speculation for hundreds of years about this gland being an access to a sixth sense, or there's all kinds of
Right.
theories, but they're just obviously theories at this point. But
Yeah.
Pretorius wanted to stimulate this gland and open up this vision and this sense that no one had. So he's explaining all this to Dr. McMichaels and tells about the big one that came and bit Pretorius's head off.
Like a gingerbread man. Yeah, I get the close-up
Yeah,
shot.
that's a great quote.
Yeah.
His eyes, and, Stuart Gordon brought forward Jeffrey Combs and Barbara Crampton from
Yeah.
Reanimator to this film. And Reanimator is Combs. It's his movie, right?
Mhm.
He's got some good parts in this, but this movie's all Barbara Crampton.
And they both they flipped roles for both movies, right? Where
Yes.
he was the scientist in this one, right, right.
Yeah, yeah. It's like he's the push everything too far crazy in Reanimator, and now he's like shut it down
Trying to
guy.
shut it down, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
So it's cool to see him play like both roles. Yeah.
yeah. And they were icons of that era of horror films for sure.
And they have great chemistry. Yeah, yeah. It's fun to watch.
Uh, she decides to give Crawford a CAT scan, and what do you know? He has an enlarged pineal gland.
Yeah.
That from the stimulation from the
Yeah.
resonator.
And it's growing and it shouldn't be possible. And yeah.
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 She convinces the cops to release Crawford into her custody, and they send a man, Bubba, and her plan is to recreate the experiment. And the cops like, I really want to know what happened in that room. So
Yeah.
she kind of gets an open door to go do this. And Bubba's the great Ken Foree from Dawn of the Dead. So
Dawn of
we
the
got
Dead.
an all-star trio
Yeah.
here going back to this house, which gave me a little nostalgia rewatching it all these years later.
Yeah. It's still a fun movie to watch. Yeah.
They rebuild the resonator and they turn it on. And lo and behold, Pretorius appears. He's not dead, but he's transformed into this goopy, very
Slimy.
80s, slimy
Yeah.
creature with malleable flesh. He can just,
Yeah. It's like the like dough. Like he presses his shoulder and just like it's like presses down like Play-Doh.
and it slides off, and it's just,
Yeah.
but he's all he's talking about is it's amazing the dimensions that he can see, and we've all been blind, and this is the
Yeah.
greatest pleasure. And he talks very 50 Shades of Gray times 1,000 kind of creepy, right?
Yeah. Yeah. He's like, I can show you. Just come touch me. Yeah. It's just real weird. Yeah.
He starts to morph and change, and Crawford shuts down the resonator. He disappears, and everything goes back to normal. Well, from Crawford's perspective, I just proved I didn't kill this guy, so let me the heck out of here.
Right. I want nothing to do with this. Like I said originally. Yeah.
Bubba's on the same wavelength, and he's like, all right, well, let's get out of here.
Yeah.
But Dr. McMichaels is intrigued and energized, and she seems somewhat turned on by the possibilities Pretorius was hinting at.
Yeah. It's almost like she's possessed by the idea, right? Like something's kind of possessed her to want to keep prodding at it.
And she talks about, we could possibly cure schizophrenia, and that we need to try it again. And it's on us to do this research. And it's one of those things where she's convincing herself because nobody else is really buying it.
Right. Yeah.
But another probably logical gap in the thing is they're in the same town, right? He was arrested by the local cops and taken to the same hospital, but they decide they're going to go to bed for the night and leave in the morning.
Yeah.
Right.
Like they could just go down the road. Yeah.
You're 15 minutes from where he came from. It made no
Yeah.
sense whatsoever.
Yeah. They've got to stay there and stake it out. Yeah. They got to make breakfast there. Suddenly there's like food there for breakfast and everything. Yeah.
Yeah. So at night, they're sleeping, and Catherine McMichaels can't sleep. She goes and turns the machine off. Crawford is woken by pulsing in his forehead. You can actually see it throbbing and bouncing, and he goes up and confronts her. Like, what are you doing? And she kisses him. She's clearly changed. She's clearly
Yes.
not herself. And Dr. Pretorius once again appears half man, half mutated blob monster.
Yeah. And it's almost kind of like a haunted house effect. Maybe I was thinking like they're so close to the resonator, they're so close to like ground zero that like it's kind of like infecting her and like it's kind of affecting her that way.
Well, we saw how it
Like pulling her in.
affected Pretorius, and it's it must have
Right.
this ability on certain people.
Right.
Um,
It lures them in, seduces them.
exactly, perfect. The Pretorius monster grabs Catherine, rips her clothes off, and starts fondling her with his goopy flesh.
It's
Well,
gross.
and she's screaming and she's fighting. She instantly flips from being into this to not being into this.
Right.
At
She's like,
least
all right,
in
this has
this
gone too far.
encounter.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
So Crawford can't get near the resonator, so he runs to the basement to try to cut the power, but he's cut off by a giant worm that's in the water of the basement, and the worm attacks him, ends up engulfing his head through it's almost like a lamprey, it's just a worm with teeth at the end, and
Yeah.
it just sticks on his head.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like almost like it has like its mouth is like a flower with teeth and it's just like
Yeah.
a Venus flytrap kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Upstairs, Pretorius has mutated further. Now he looks like an alien-like growth has come out of the top of him, and that alien-like thing settles down and engulfs Catherine's head. So two of them had their heads engulfed by various creatures from this resonator.
Yeah.
Bubba luckily rips the power cables out of the wall, shutting off the resonator, and all the creatures disappear.
And just like that, yeah. So it saves them at the last second, so they actually don't get decapitated or like like eaten.
Yeah, they were headed for the same fate
Yeah.
as Pretorius.
Yeah.
Well, Crawford is now bald and unconscious. The worm pulled off all his hair. Luckily, the alien upstairs did not pull off all of Catherine's hair, but she, despite this, wants to do it again. She says, I'll do it alone. I will stand with my hand on the handle. But she wants to do it again. And Bubba thinks she's crazy.
Well, she is crazy at this point because at this point, what else do you need to see?
Yeah. It's
You-
been
you-
bad every time.
You almost got eaten by a monster. That wasn't enough. You think turning the switch is gonna like you're gonna get some extra notes. Like you're gonna yeah.
And you were screaming, fighting it. It's not like you were. Pretorius enjoyed it immediately, right? She did not. It was not a pleasant experience, but it's like an addict. And actually, Bubba actually mentions that.
Yes, he says, "I've seen people like you in the streets. You're an addict. That's what you're acting like." Yeah, it's a good line.
So he goes down to get the stuff ready. He wants to pack and leave. While he's gone, she starts going through Dr. Pretorius's S&M gear, and she's kind of like touching herself as she's
Mystified by it.
And you can see she's, whatever's gotten into her is going, and it's not stopping. She dresses up as a dominatrix, and she mounts the sleeping Crawford and just gets on top of him. And Bubba returns, and he's like, "Lady, what are you doing?"
Yeah. You got to get your clothes on. You don't get your clothes on, I'm leaving without you. Like, we got to go. Yeah.
She stands up and she starts to come on to him. But he grabs her and he shakes her out of her trance, and he points at her mirror and he goes, "Look at you. Who are you? What happened to you?" And it's kind of like an awareness moment where she looks at herself in the mirror and she says, "I don't know."
Right. Yeah. It's like she snaps out of it real quick.
But the resonator powers itself on. And as they go up and try to shut it off, it shoots electrical zaps at anyone who approaches it. And now it releases, there's like insect-like monsters from this dimension, and they swarm and eat Bubba until he's just a pile of goop. He's trying to move his mouth, and he's just a pile of goop with a half a head and trying to talk.
It's one of my favorite special effects of the movie. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, it was well done.
Everything's kind of down to the bone, and like his whole body's like deconstructed to like looks like he's like 80 pounds of just like goop, and like he's got his head.
Yeah, the one thing about the body horror in this movie is, some body horror movies are about one particular subject who's being
Yeah,
transformed or deformed. A lot of people in this movie suffer from
yeah.
the body horror
They
from
do.
Beyond.
Yeah, they do a lot of different shots with a lot of different creative things.
Pretorius is now a fleshy monster with his fully engaged pineal gland sticking through his forehead, and I can't help but it's kind of funny. It's bobbing
Okay,
around like
so
it has a mind of its own.
all right, here's I watched this on Amazon, and if you watch it on Amazon, they'll have the little trivia that, like on the left side that you can read.
Mhm.
And they said when they were making this movie, they said they described the pineal gland as looking like something between an asparagus and a dog dick.
I think it looks more asparagus, but you know,
Yeah, I was like that was their description when they were coming up with the script.
very good, very good. Well, it succeeds. Uh, it's 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 just probing around like it has a mind of its own. It's really kind
Yeah,
of funny, but the effects are good. You got a little hole in the head and this thing sticking through.
yeah,
He grabs Catherine Crawford, and we saw when the resonator came on, we saw the thumping on his forehead. He's been exposed to it several times now. His pineal gland bursts through his forehead now.
yeah,
You almost have like these dueling glands poking around like
yeah.
asparagus swords in the air.
The asparagus swords, yeah, yeah. So he's kind of like shifting into that parallel universe.
He tries to fight Pretorius and rescue Catherine, and she manages to get free enough to shut down the resonator with a fire extinguisher. She's
Yep.
blasting it with the cold foam, and finally it's enough to shut it down. They go back to the hospital. Now Bubba's dead. Crawford has a hole in his head, and his gland keeps like randomly poking out and looking around.
Like looking around like a periscope and then coming
Yeah,
back in.
like he's out, but the gland's not out.
It's
It's
yeah,
checking
yeah,
things out.
yeah.
Catherine has now been committed, and Dr. Block, who she scuffled with at the beginning, has ordered electroshock therapy on her,
Yeah, she's always wanted to do this apparently. She jumped at the chance.
which is super unprofessional.
Yeah,
Uh,
HR would not allow that.
I've never done it before. As a patient, you've been here 15 minutes, and I've determined you're the candidate.
It's her coworker that she loathed. Yeah.
Um, Crawford comes to and is eating. He's in the pathology room and he's eating body parts.
Yeah, like a brain or something.
Dr. Block comes in and is like, yeah, Crawford, you don't want to be doing that. He's like, oh. And he stands up and goes and he just attaches his mouth to her eye. Like he's
Yeah.
eating her face through her eye hole.
Yeah, he's like sucking her eye out.
And he kills her.
Yeah.
The emergency siren goes off, which actually saves Catherine from the procedure. Dr. Block wasn't even doing the procedure herself. She was having somebody else do it, which was
Right.
shocking.
Well, yeah, you have to get a special technician to do something like that.
So she gets saved by the emergency of Dr. Block's death. She escapes and drives off in a van. Crawford goes outside and kills two ambulance drivers, and he eats their faces the same way, mouth over the eye hole and just slurping like he's sucking their brains out.
And it's almost like he's not even doing it like he's not doing it like as an evil character. Like it's almost like it's taking over him. Like the parasite is taking over him and making him do it. And but then he becomes aware of the horror of what's going on around him.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely the gland is in control, the
Right.
dimension is in control, however you want to look at it. But
Yeah, so
Crawford's
it's not like Crawford's this evil character, right? So I think it's interesting because like you're still kind of rooting for him, but like this thing is like trying to take over him. So it's not like he's like trying to kill these people; it's just happening to him.
it's like it's the contemporary film Brain Damage that came out around the same time, where the evil Elmer was actually controlling the guy who wasn't a bad guy, wasn't a killer, but was forced
Right.
to carry these things out. Very similar symbiotic relationship.
Yep.
Catherine, they both go back to Pretorius's house at different vehicles, different times. Catherine plants a bomb on the resonator, But then Crawford shows up, not in
I
control
like
of himself.
I like how it's a TNT bomb, like an Acme, like
Yeah.
something you'd see in like Wile E. Coyote. It's like 5 TNT sticks with a clock on it.
Yeah, she bought it. Definitely bought it from Wile E. Coyote. Um, Crawford shows up. He's not himself. He's being controlled by the gland. He locks her in the chains and the cuffs that were hanging in Pretorius's room.
Yeah.
And
The
his
rifle, the
gland,
rifle on the wall, right from the first act. Like, well, why are these here?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. We know somebody's going to use them.
Yeah.
And his gland is actually touching her and probing her. Very creepy
Yeah.
visual.
Yeah.
But she manages to turn her head and bite the gland off. She spits the bloody stem out, and this pineal gland has just been snipped,
Yeah.
which actually turns Crawford back to himself, which I thought was kind of cool. Which
Yeah,
proves
well,
the gland was doing all.
Gland was like the parasite, right?
Yeah. The resonator kicks on because it's gained the power to run itself off the electricity, and Pretorius returns more hideous than ever. Crawford returning back to himself, he taunts Pretorius, trying to take his attention away from Catherine. And Catherine gets loose by these fish things flying through the air trying to bite her. She keeps moving, so they bite the cuffs on the handcuffs so she can get free.
Get free, yeah.
So
Then she like lights a match and like distracts the fish. Like she has matches and she throws them down, and the fish are like, "What's that?" And they run towards it, and she gets out. Yeah.
yeah, she gets out and she goes to find Crawford. But all she finds is his headless body. He has now suffered the same fate as Pretorius and is gone over to the other dimension.
Mhm.
Pretorius is growing. He's becoming large and mutating. He grabs her, and then out of his fleshy, massive side, he births Crawford.
Yeah.
It's a
Which
it's a
is
very
this is another one of the most impressive special effects. Again, the special effects are really impressive. Especially like how many times they show Pretorius like transforming. Like it's not just once or twice. It's kind of like throughout the entire movie.
yeah, almost reminds me of The Thing, where
Yeah.
the shapes and the forms and those were based on people and animals, but this is just crazy Lovecraft goop.
Yeah, like in the goop, there's like two skulls that are biting each other and stuff, and it's just like this like hallucinogenic nightmare of like goop and gore.
So as Crawford births out, he hasn't been swayed over to Pretorius's idea. He's still himself, and he kind of fights and struggles with Pretorius, trying to release Catherine, trying to save her, and they're holding her tight. Pretorius has a hold of her, and we keep seeing the clock ticking down. Well, finally, Crawford fights Pretorius enough for her to get free. She kicks her foot out, and she jumps out of the second-story window as the bomb goes off,
Yeah.
exploding the resonator, exploding the creatures, exploding everything else in there.
I remember seeing it going, "Oh, come on, she's not going to survive that. That's stupid." But then when you look down, she has both her knees are snapped, and they took another opportunity to do some more body humor, body horror, where like you could see like her knees like just completely snapped. And I was like, all right, at least they did that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What another plot inconsistency is, other than the neighbor with the dog, it kind of every time they go there, it seems like they're in a remote area, like kind of out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
As soon as she hits the ground, there's 20 neighbors there.
The neighbors, yeah, they're on a cul-de-sac. Right?
It's night, and they're all outdoors, just waiting there to help her. Like, were you guys
Yeah.
trick or treating? You guys haven't been here any other time we've shown the house. Now all of a sudden,
there's been disturbances, monsters, and electrical interference going on in this house, and no one bothered to come except now.
now everybody's there. The HOA must have filed a complaint. The neighbors come to her aid, and she just cackles insanely, and it kind of leaves you somewhat ambiguous as the ending. Has she been affected so much that she's never going to get over this? Is she going to go build her own resonator? Because she's still so.
The HOA doesn't allow resonators.
Yeah. So it definitely is. Definitely is an interesting movie. It is, to me. It's peak '80s. It's got
Yeah.
the over-the-top special effects,
Yeah.
a little bit of cheese in the acting, a little bit
Yeah.
of
It's got some camp. Yeah.
yeah, definitely camp, and but it's fun.
Yeah.
And
It's a very fun movie. It holds up. Yeah.
yeah, I really enjoyed this the first time I saw it, and I hadn't seen it in many years at this point, but I enjoyed going back to it.
Yeah, I hadn't seen it in years either, but I had a blast watching it. It was fun.
Our second film this week in the category body horror is Malignant from 2021, directed by James Wan. And I saw this movie when it first came out. It was kind of like one of the first releases right after the pandemic,
Mhm.
where we had seen a kind of a dead period for new films, and I was like, "What the heck am I watching here?" Uh,
Yes, that was literally what I wrote down. The first time I saw this movie, that's what I said. I was like, what the heck is this? Yeah, that's your original reaction.
and I look at him like, okay, it's James Wan, creator of the Conjuring universe, Insidious, Saw. I
Yeah.
almost think this was like the studio saying, okay, you've been great. You've made us a ton of money. Do whatever you want.
Yeah, he also did Aquaman. I mean, he made billions of dollars in the box office, right, to his name.
Yeah.
And then this kind of comes out, and it's kind of like the slasher mystery '80s camp kind of like it's like a bunch of different things that's kind of like put together, like almost like three different acts, three different kind of styles, but it's all James Wan, obviously. Um, it's interesting. I've watched it. I think this is actually my third time watching. I watched it twice. I like the movie. It's fun. But it's like you said, it's very different from what else James Wan has done.
I love that it's different. And I think it's bananas. It's completely nuts.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's different than it's throwback to a lot of different things, but it's different than almost anything. And I love that about it.
And I think that's its strongest credit is that it's very original.
Yeah, for sure. We start at 1993 Research Hospital for Kids. We hear but don't see a patient named Gabriel. He's controlling electric devices with his mind, and he goes on a mad killing spree before finally being sedated. And
Yep.
we see a surgery is scheduled, and the quote from the doctor is, "It's time to remove the cancer."
Yeah, yeah, and before like there's the video recording of her saying he's getting stronger, he's getting stronger, and they won't be able to contain him anymore. And then he kind of goes on a killing spree, like you said.
So then it jumps to 2021, current day from when the movie was made.
Mhm.
And we meet Madison, who's having a difficult pregnancy, and she's concerned. She's lost her previous few, and she comes home from work and gets in a fight with her husband, Derek, who, by all accounts, from the brief time we get to know Derek, is a total loser.
Yeah, he just kind of comes off as that like abusive, possible alcoholic who knows, like, just like jerk. He's like sitting there lying there watching TV, eating chips, being mean to her, like, oh, you're going to work. It just, yeah.
Yeah, she's trying to talk to him, and he's watching UFC, and like she shuts it off, and he's like, "Hey, I was watching that."
Yeah.
She's like, "Yeah, but I'm talking to you, and this is important."
Right.
They get into this fight, and he pushes her into the wall very hard,
Yeah. Slams her head against it into the
slams her head
drywall.
back,
Yeah.
and she keeps, she's reaching. It's bad. She locks him out of the bedroom, and that night Derek is sleeping on the couch, and rightfully so. He should be in
Yes.
jail.
Right. Yeah.
Well, in the middle of the night while he's on the couch, we see the appliances start to behave strangely, and there's things turning themselves on, and things starting to make themselves run, and we see a shadow, an image of a man creature, very strange looking thing, uh, mostly in shadow.
It's like
hard
very
to
supernatural. Yeah. You kind of, at this point, you're wondering, like, is there some kind of ghost? Or is there some kind of like, it's James Wan. Is there a conjuring thing going
Yeah.
on here? Yeah.
Yeah, we don't get a real good look at it, purposely so, but he attacks and kills Derek. We cut to Madison opening her eyes up, and it's a cool twist on the nightmare scenario, because it's like she was dreaming this, but she
Yes.
goes downstairs, her head's bleeding, she touches her head again, and it's still fresh blood.
Yeah. You're
Goes
wondering,
down,
is she still having a nightmare? Is she still thinking about when she was attacked, and yeah, everything's very mysterious at this point.
But she goes downstairs and finds out that everything she saw was true.
Yeah.
She is then attacked. The same shadowy creature is getting and chasing her and making her scared and running upstairs and locking herself away. She survives. The police arrive and they take her to the hospital. And when she wakes up, she has lost the baby.
Yep.
Which is
And yeah,
a tragic and awful real human horror that they kind of interject in this otherwise kind of silly movie.
it's so yeah, but that's another. It's a layer of horror, right? Just kind of dealing with that emotion, right?
Yeah, it almost a little bit reminds me of we just talked last week about in Planet Terror. You know, it's a goofy, crazy, over the top, not
And then you
serious
have
film,
that,
and then
yeah,
the kid shoots himself in the head, and
and
it's like,
you're just like, wait, and then they kind of leave that hanging, and then you're watching the movie like, wait a second, we still have this thing we haven't dealt with. Yeah,
the only difference here is that it's so early in the movie, we don't really fully know the tone of the film yet.
right. Which is
At
kind
the
of what the
end, when
movie's
you go
going for.
back, it really doesn't fit. But at this
Right.
point, you don't really
You don't
know that it doesn't fit.
Right. There's actually something. Yeah, it's like you said, it's kind of out of sequence the way they kind of put that in there. Going back and watching it, but it's still it's part of the plot.
Her adopted sister, Sydney, visits her, and we see Madison go home after 2 weeks, installs new bolts on the doors. She tells Sydney that she is adopted, which apparently Sydney did not know, and that she has no memories before showing up at their house.
Right. And that they kind of play that off as like, well, you were traumatized before, you came to the orphanage and we got you. So you kind of like probably repressed a lot of that.
Yeah. Your life hit a reset button, and there you are.
They're playing it off as typical psychological stuff that a child would experience, right?
We see a woman. She's giving underground tours, and
In Seattle, yeah.
Yeah, and the underground of Seattle, historical tours, kind of thing you do when you travel, and very touristy.
Yeah.
She closes for the night, and she is attacked by the creature man.
Yeah.
I'm always unsure. On my notes, I was very unsure what to call it. I kept calling it the man, and then the next line I'd call it the creature.
Yeah.
It's a mysterious creature man.
It's got multiple pronouns.
Absolutely. It identifies as hell.
Yeah.
Right now. The woman is taken and tied up somewhere. We don't know where.
Mm-hmm. And we don't even know who she is, right? So
no idea who she is.
Right. Yeah.
Yep. And she wasn't killed like Derek was. She was just tied up.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a bit of a mystery. We see the doctor from 1993. All those years before, 28 years before, gets a phone call, and the voice on the other end of the phone says it's time to cut out the cancer.
Yeah.
And we know, obviously, we heard that.
And it's
line.
a creepy voice. Yeah.
Yeah, not a normal human voice.
Right.
Madison sees through one of her nightmare visions, she sees the doctor killed, which comes to fact. We find out the doctor was really murdered.
Mm-hmm.
And then she has another vision of another doctor who assisted in the procedure. And she goes to the cops and she tells them she saw this vision, and it was this doctor, and he's dead. You got to check it out, and convinces them to, okay, well, we'll go check on him.
Well, it's her alibi, right? That's what she tells them. She's like, if you guys are starting to think that I killed Derek because I have motive, right? They think she did it, and so she's like, listen, if you come here and check this out, and he's like, you can find out that I'm not lying to you. It'll be my alibi, right? So they're like, all right, we'll go check it out.
Yeah. The suspected killer pointing out where more dead bodies are doesn't really free them from suspicion.
Right, and they don't have a warrant. They kind of just go there.
Yeah, they just go to check on him, and
Morgan Freeman from Seven would be like, "We can't do this."
Right, we got to pay the FBI guy under the table.
Yeah.
And the second doctor's dead.
Yep.
They have Madison provide an artist's sketch like they do in in FBI movies. She
Yeah.
sits down with an artist and do a sketch, and they hold up the sketch. It is as undefinable as my description. It's a monstrous man creature.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, yeah, that is what it looks like, but you hand that to the cops and they're
It's
just gonna think you're nuts.
it looks like well, like a 13-year-old would draw an anime monster, like it doesn't look like anything real.
Yeah. She gets a phone call and it's from this being in the same scratchy voice, and it calls her Emily and says, that's your real name. We know her as
Yeah.
Madison, but
Mhm.
again, she has no memories before she went to her adopted parents.
At this point, I now have the same problem with my notes because I don't know if I'm supposed to call her Madison or Emily.
Right? That's the same thing, right?
So I've got multiple issues here with all these characters. I'm like, what are these people's names?
And she's going, she's arguing. She's like, she doesn't want to believe it. You can see it's causing her trauma. If she locked away those memories, it's opening doors, and she's
Yeah.
being exposed to some painful memories.
Hmm.
The acting in this movie is very good.
Yep.
And she calls out Gabriel, no, and she doesn't know where she got that from.
Yeah. And he
Well, we
says,
know
see, you've
that's the
always known.
name.
Yeah.
Yeah, we know that's the name that was being called out in the research hospital in
Right.
1993.
So now we're putting it something together. Yeah.
She goes to her adopted mother, trying to find out who she really is, because this has opened doors. She knows the name Gabriel. She doesn't know why she knows it. She realizes her name used to be Emily. She's like, Mom, what do you know? What was I before I came here? And she starts playing her some old home tapes from after she was adopted. And she
Like ninth
talks.
birthday or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And it was like she was 8 when she first went to her adopted parents.
Yep.
So she's at the birthday party, she's talking to her invisible friend Gabriel.
Yeah.
And we see
And
examples.
not funny talk, right? Like,
No.
hey, Mr. Snuffles, you want a piece of cake? It's more like, no, I'm not gonna cut my parents, and like in front of everyone. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's like crazy talk. Yeah.
If you adopted that kid and they're sitting there doing that, you send that thing back.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
You
get
get a
out your
refund.
receipt
You
and
get a refund.
you like store credit. I don't care what you give me. This is coming back. But we see examples on these videotapes of Gabriel making her do bad things. And we even see a clip of her standing over her pregnant mother, who's pregnant with her adopted sister, Sydney, who's not yet born, with a knife in her hand. And you feel like if not cut off, she's going to pull a movie inside and go after that baby.
Yeah. Yeah.
But she doesn't, luckily.
Well, yeah.
We actually see this later, but it's just an example of
I was gonna say, yeah.
Gabriel was just influencing her very negatively throughout her childhood.
Yeah.
The cops in their research trying to put all this together, they're trying to put it together the same as we're trying to put it together. And I really like that perspective because, sometimes there's movies where the whole thing and the characters in the film don't.
Right. You figured out before them. Yeah.
Or there's movies where they know the whole thing, but you don't. And this, like, we're all discovering it together. And I found
Which
that
I
cool.
liked. Yeah, I thought that that adds to the layer of mystery in the movie because they can't figure it out and you're trying to figure it out. So it's almost like you're really trying to figure it out before they can. And it's just kind of it keeps twisting and turning.
But they discover a name of a third doctor involved in this procedure back at this facility in 1993. And they go to the doctor. And it's too late. The doctor is dead, but it just happened, and the killer is still there.
Yeah.
And Detective Shaw is the lead detective on this case. The killer, the creature man, attacks Detective Shaw and runs. And then probably my favorite scene of the whole movie, maybe not, but a really, really cool scene is you take the stereotypical cop bad guy chase scene,
Mhm.
and then you completely twist it by the fact that this creature's movements are so awkward and unnatural. And you're like, what is this thing?
Like an insect, almost like limbs, right? Like it's almost like insect, like reverse limbs or something like that. It's weird. It does parkour. It's jumping around. Yeah,
It's insanity, and you're like, uh, what could this thing possibly be?
yeah. It just adds some more mystery because like it's not even moving like a thing that you can recognize.
Yeah, that was what blew me away. Is it was always awkward, but now we get to see it running and jumping and escaping, and we get to see these awkward movements magnified, and it's like, oh my God, this is
Right.
unlike anything I've seen.
Right. Now you're really trying to piece it together. Not just the story, but like what is this creature?
He manages to get away, the creature. The cops decide now they've taken the suspicion off of Maddie, right?
Right.
Because they went there, she
They saw
wasn't
something.
there,
Yeah.
this guy was killed. Okay, there is somebody out there. And now Detective Shaw can actually look at the sketch that we thought was insane
And be like,
and be
yeah,
like, yeah, that pretty well matches what I saw.
I saw something like that. Yeah. What the heck's going on here? Yeah.
So they decide to use hypnotherapy to unlock Maddie's past. And she discovers her name was really Emily May. And this is where she sees the scene where she almost killed Sydney in the womb, thanks to Gabriel's influence.
Yeah,
And
and Sydney's it's funny because they ask about a psychic earlier. She's like, "Don't you guys like use psychics to find people like this?" And she was and the detective was like, "No, what are you talking about?" It's a little bit of humor.
yeah,
And then they say they're going to bring in the hypnotherapist, and Sydney's like, "I knew it." And the
yeah,
detective's like, she's not a psychic, you dipshit." Like, and it's just
I told
it's
you to
funny.
use these
Yeah, I told
crazy
you you're going to use
mystics.
that. It's like, no, it's a
Yeah.
hypnotherapist. Yeah,
Yeah. She freaks out when she realizes that she almost killed Sydney, who at this point is really the closest person in her life to her. I did find it interesting. I know Derek was a loser, and we have no sympathy for Derek.
no,
Uh, but but she did not spend 10 seconds of this film uh, feeling bad about Derek being killed.
no one did.
Yeah,
Not even the
I know,
police.
but
They gave up on that
she
investigation
married him. We
immediately.
didn't, right?
They didn't.
Like
They didn't even continue the investigation with him. They're like, all right, we got bigger stuff to worry
nobody
about.
cares. Like move on,
Yeah,
scrape them up, pack them up.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I just always find that interesting when
There's
they
no yellow tape in the house or anything. They don't care. They just like keep living your life.
this story moves. There's not a lot of fluff, right? It's once it
Yeah,
just goes.
yeah. It hits the
Um,
ground.
but she freaks out when she realizes she almost killed Sydney and gets pulled out of the hypnosis. Well, for some reason, the cops still suspect Maddie. They suspect her involvement. They think she knows more than she's letting on. Uh, they're talking to her at her house, and they get up to leave. They have nothing to arrest her on, but they're just very suspicious. And as they go to leave, the woman that we saw grabbed and tied up, we see her escaping, and we see her fall through the attic roof into the room, right
Yeah,
next to where the cops are interviewing Maddie.
yeah.
She
Which is
was,
pretty intense entrance actually, because I did not expect. You don't expect it. Yeah,
it was crazy, and we like this woman was locked up in Maddie's attic this whole time, and we weren't aware.
yeah.
She wasn't aware.
Yeah, it's like Black Christmas.
So now they do. Now they do. They go up there. They find the outfits. They find the murder weapons, um, and they arrest her.
Yeah.
While they're interrogating her, Shaw gets a call on his phone from Gabriel, who's kind of taunting him. And we know Gabriel has the power to run electricity. The lights just poof go out.
Yeah,
But that still doesn't release Maddie. She is put into a cell with a bunch of stereotypical rough prison women.
yeah. Some biker gang looking people, and yeah.
Yeah, this wasn't the weekend flower club. This, it's
No, yeah, yeah,
just what you'd imagine, right? If
yeah,
you
yeah. Some dangerous miscreants.
Yeah, so she's thrown in there with all these rough women, and she's kind of like her mind's a mess. She's confused. She's scared. She's just kind of sitting to herself, like doesn't know what to do. Sydney goes off to the old hospital where Madison was born as a child, and she was Emily at that time. And she goes going through all these archives. The hospital's closed and shuttered down, but it's funny that nobody moved any of the records. Um,
Yeah, they're just in the basement. Yeah,
Everything's still there. Like all these doctors that worked on these cases didn't bring
yeah.
any of this stuff.
Perfectly filed under ML, all that. Everything's still alphabetical. You got tapes. Everything's right there to access. Yeah,
Yeah. Plot convenience.
Yes. Well,
Uh,
there's a lot of that in this movie, but
and
like you said,
all movies
every
do it.
every movie has to do that. You got an hour and a half to tell the story, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So she finds her records as well as videos from her time at this clinic. And she discovers the woman in the attic was her real mother, and that Emily had a parasitic twin attached to the back of her head. And that's who Gabriel was.
Yeah.
And
They suppressed it by like just like we're just gonna like fold the back of your head in. We're just gonna like zip the zip lock it up and just gonna suppress it. Yeah.
and you know, right there, I'm immediately thrown back to a B movie from the early '80s called Basket Case,
Yes. Yeah.
where you know the guy's deformed conjoined twin brother. He
He
carries
keeps it
around in a
with them.
basket and he kills people.
Yeah.
Uh,
We
that was,
covered that, didn't we?
we did not, but definitely a
No? All right.
throwback to same
Yeah.
director made Brain Damage, who we've actually already referenced today.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it all comes full circle. But uh, you know, the effects of the parasitic twin on the back of her head were
Yeah.
very 80s. They were a little bit cheesy, but I thought they were cool. It was
Yeah. Yeah. I loved it. Yeah.
it's you know, it's flailing away.
It's flailing. Yeah. Or like I can't remember what movie it was, but like maybe it was like Total Recall, or like the stomach was like a second like twin like
yeah,
in the guy. Yeah.
right.
Is that what it was? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny. Our topic is body horror.
Yeah.
And up until this very moment, this movie has not been a body horror movie.
Right. Right.
From this point on, it's all body horror.
It's all body horror, and there's a lot of '80s and '90s stuff we could have went with, but I thought it was kind of cool to contrast it with a very modern 2020s body horror. Right, I thought this is one of the better ones of recent.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's just so unique.
Yeah,
Um, so the parasitic twin on the back of her head was removed during surgery, but a part of the brain was too entwined with Emily's brain, and they actually had to tuck it back into her head and then seal the flap up. So the brain, Gabriel's brain, this powerful controlling electricity brain, was sitting in her head the whole time.
yeah,
And we start to piece together uh, it was killing her fetuses. It was taking the life from this reason
yeah.
she had all the
'Cause she
problems
had
with
three
birth.
miscarriages. Right. Yeah.
And it really, its dormancy was ended by the blow to the back of the head.
Right, which kind of brings it back to why that happened. Yeah.
It emerged fresh, and it's out there and it's in control.
Yeah.
All this we learned right as Madison starts to get roughed up in this prison. She's in this cell, and you know something stupid happens, and she gets pushed, and just this big fight starts.
hmm
And
And I do want to say that this for a horror movie, this has one of the coolest action sequences towards the end.
yeah, that's this scene is the reason I backed off on my chase scene being my favorite.
I was gonna
Because
say when you
because
said
this is
that, I was
probably
like,
my
no, there's a
favorite.
better scene. I
Yeah,
knew what you were talking about. Yeah, yeah.
this is probably my favorite. We
This
see,
is like an action movie sequence right here. It's really good. Yeah,
but before it gets there, we see Gabriel emerge from the back of her head, takes the
yeah,
back of her hair and parts it, and is mangled from being smashed against the wall. She kept feeling the flesh. There's this
yeah.
mutated face on the back of her head, and now her hair's, and we find out why the awkward move it because Gabriel controls her body backwards.
And yeah, well, so everything's kind of like snapped backwards, and I've seen this movie 3 times, and I still can't wrap my head around it. Like it's so weird looking at the way like the body moves and walks like backwards, but it's going forward. It's bizarre.
It's so crazy, and
It's creepy. Yeah,
for some reason, um, it's why it moves backwards. It's why the motion is so awkward. But for some reason, this little flap of Gabriel brain that's in there and now in control is a dynamic killing machine and knows all kinds of special martial arts and different ways to.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Jujitsu and everything. Yeah,
These things are
just
hard enough to
complete.
do with your body facing normal,
Right,
not
zero
let
training.
alone backwards.
Yeah. You know what I thought? Like, I wonder if James Wan saw The Exorcist when she's coming down the stairs upside down with like possessed looking and said, let's
Yeah,
make that a character.
yeah,
Let's just
yeah,
make that a character.
yeah. It could be. But this backwards moving Gabriel beats the hell out of all the other all the women in the cell.
Yeah.
Goes on a brutal killing spree for all the prisoners
Yeah.
and cops in the whole building.
Yeah.
And it's very over the top death. It's very Kill Bill, John
Yes.
Wick combo.
Hmm.
And she escapes. And that is, to me, that's the best scene in the movie. It's
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
amazing
Detective
in
Shaw.
its execution.
It's awesome. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
done in this big, huge, open, uh, police station area. So everything's dark and it's done really well.
Yeah, the main detective, Detective Shaw, manages to survive the attack. He's one of the few people left alive at the police station. But Gabriel's now headed to the hospital.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And then Sydney gets to the hospital and Serena's there.
Yeah, that's the real mom.
Hmm.
Gabriel kills the guard who's guarding Serena's door by bursting his pacemaker with his
Which I
power to
thought was
run
cool.
electricity. Yeah.
Yeah.
And attacks Sydney. Gets into the room and confronts the real mom. And in kind of a story twist, the mom recognizes what's happening from her hospital bed, and
Yeah.
rather than be scared or be confrontational, she apologizes.
Yeah. She asked for forgiveness. Yeah.
She says, "You were my boy. I shouldn't have let them hurt you, and I shouldn't have let them do that to you." And
Yeah.
this makes Gabriel pause, and Shaw emerges in the door and starts shooting him. Which, who knows how this was going to turn out if Shaw didn't appear, but he thinks he's doing the right thing.
Right.
So he takes Shaw and he throws him out in the hall. For some reason, Gabriel has tremendous power.
Yeah.
And he pushes a bed over on the top of Sydney, attacking her.
Yeah.
And he comes over,
Sorry.
he shoots Sydney, and then he goes and he starts to choke out the real mom. And we're like, oh, this is a disaster.
Yeah. Yeah.
Except it was all a trick of the mind. Madison has reasserted control, and we see her lock Gabriel into a prison inside of her mind. And that to me is very Doctor Sleep.
Oh, yes. I was going to say the same thing. Yeah. When he goes and learns to like put them in the thing, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's funny. I mean, everything influences everything, right? And it's all
It
how you
does,
put
of
it
course.
together.
Of course. Yeah.
But she physically locks Gabriel inside of a prison in her mind.
Yeah. They
And
have
took
this
her body back.
confrontation in her mind. She's like, I'm in control now, and puts her in a box, kind of in a cell. Yeah.
Yeah. So Sydney was never shot. The real mom was not choked out. It was all a trick. So they're both okay.
Yeah.
And that's the end of the movie. It's a crazy and wild ride.
Yeah.
Face that they made out of the mangled back of her head to represent Gabriel, which was a mix of a face and her crushed skull.
Yeah.
It was just
it's great
insane.
body horror. Yeah. And it's great body horror, cool kill scenes, great action scene at the end. It's a great payoff just for that, I think. It's got lots of mystery. It's got a lot of camp. They've got a little bit of humor here and there. They're kind of self-aware with how ridiculous the movie is. They're kind of just moving it forward though. I think it's just a crazy movie. It's just fun to watch.
It is. I love that. I think James Wan was afforded some leeway because of the success he had, and I just love that he used that freedom to just say, "I'm going to do something completely bonkers here."
Who knows how long he had that script and was just ready to go with it, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Upon rewatch, there was some clues as to where the story was going and certain things were, but I can't get over the movement and the motion and how
I can't.
insane that
Yeah.
backwards fighting Gabriel was, and
Because your
even the
brain
chase
doesn't
scene
process it. Yeah, your brain doesn't process it. It's like that's not natural the way that's working, right? It's weird.
Absolutely.
Which is part of the trick. I think James Wan knows that. He understands the creepy factor of body horror, right? That's part of the body horror is that this character is moving completely unnatural and killing people.
Yeah, and you're exactly right, and that's one of the the primal parts of body horror is when you're no longer in control, and that's completely represented by the Gabriel taking over
character. Yeah. So it's a good twist. It's not just like a oozy, bubbly, face that's melting. It's like it's a whole character that's deformed, and in its movements that's where you kind of find the horror. And I think they capture that really well with this entire movie.
Yeah, agree. So it's body horror on multiple levels and definitely fits our category.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that was a great category. That was a lot of fun. Two movies I
Yeah.
enjoyed. They're crazy.
There's fun, crazy movies. Yeah.
They're not
I had a
based in
blast watching them.
realism, but
No.
a lot of horror is not, and I like to have fun with my horror. So.
Yeah, you just need something to just watch something ridiculous once in a while. It doesn't have to be linear with any kind of like conceptual realism that we have. It's like, no, I just want to watch something insane. And then
Yeah.
these two movies bring it.
Good story, good acting, good special effects, and bring the crazy. I'm all there.
Bring the crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's our show for this week. We are the Weekly Horoscope. We appreciate you listening, watching, however you find us. Please remember to click subscribe, rate us. We appreciate that very much. And we will see you next time. I'm Jerry. That's Matt. And thank you for being with us.
All right. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, everyone.
Your weekly horoscope with Jerry and Matt.